Welcome to Movie Mash. Today, we're going to recap a sci-fi film called Pacific Rim. Please don't forget to subscribe for more interesting movie recaps. In 2013, a fissure beneath the Pacific Ocean opens, revealing another dimension. A colossal monster emerges, wreaking havoc in San Francisco. After days of destruction and numerous casualties, the military defeats the beast. The initial attack turns out to be just the beginning as more monsters come through the fissure, targeting coastal cities across the Pacific. The world bands together to create the Jaeger program, a fleet of gigantic mechanical beasts designed to combat the creatures. However, early attempts to have one pilot per Jaeger fail due to the immense pressure of controlling the robots alone. Instead, the program adopts a two-pilot system. With the Jaegers in action, the tide begins to turn, and the Kaiju are defeated one by one. The world becomes fascinated with the Jaegers and their pilots, turning them into celebrities and spawning a merchandise industry. Meanwhile, the dead Kaiju are sold on the black market for their parts, which are valued for various purposes, including medicine. In 2020, 7 years since the fissure appeared, Raleigh Beckett and his older brother Yancey are renowned Jaeger pilots with a flawless record of Kaiju kills. They operate the Gypsy Danger, one of the most well-known Jaegers. Their mission is to intercept a Category 3 Kaiju heading for Anchorage, which is larger and more powerful than previous Category 3. Despite the presence of a fishing boat in the Kaiju's path, the Becketts are ordered to prioritize protecting Anchorage. Despite orders to prioritize Anchorage's protection, the Beckett brothers disobey and save the fishing boat. The Kaiju attacks them, however, and tears off the Gypsy Danger's left arm, killing Yancey. Raleigh struggles to fight back alone but ultimately uses the Jaeger's plasma blaster to defeat the Kaiju. He then brings the damaged Gypsy Danger to a remote beach where it finally breaks down. Raleigh emerges from the cockpit with injuries, experiencing the same pain as the Jaeger, and collapses from exhaustion and emotional trauma over his brother's death. Following the tragic events, Raleigh quits the Jaeger program and tries to find employment wherever he can. Eventually, he takes up a job as a construction worker on the western coast of the United States. He works on the construction of a massive coastal wall designed to keep the Kaiju out. Now, many countries want to shut it down because of the high number of pilot casualties and the expensive cost to maintain it. People believe that building coastal barriers will protect them, but Stacker Pentecost, the program's leader, disagrees. Raleigh is working on a wall near Sitka, Alaska when he sees on TV that a Kaiju breached the wall surrounding Sydney Harbor in Australia. Thankfully, a Jaeger called Striker Eureka was nearby before being relocated to Hong Kong and defeated the monster. Shortly after the news, Pentecost arrives in a helicopter at Raleigh's construction site and invites him to join the Jaeger program again. Raleigh is hesitant, but Pentecost persuades him that he's meant to be a pilot. Raleigh is flown to the Hong Kong base, also known as the Shatterdome, where he meets Mako Mori. Mako admits to studying Raleigh's moves during his time as a Jaeger pilot. Pentecost introduces Raleigh to two scientists working for the program. One of them is Dr. Newton Jaisler, an obsessive Kaiju enthusiast who studies the creatures through salvaged organs and other biological parts. The other scientist is Dr. Gottlieb, a more pragmatic individual who uses his mathematical expertise to calculate the frequency of Kaiju emerging from the ocean rift. At the Shatterdome, the remaining Jaegers and their crews have gathered, including the three-pilot Crimson Typhoon from China, Cherno Alpha from Russia, Striker Eureka fresh from its mission in Australia, and Gypsy Danger, much to Raleigh's surprise. However, Gypsy Danger has been rebuilt and upgraded for even more intense combat following its encounter 5 years ago. Raleigh asks Pentecost about their plan, and he reveals that they're devising a strategy to drop a nuclear bomb into the rift between dimensions. Raleigh, without his brother, must help find a replacement. During a training exercise, Mako irritates him by calling out the number of moves he takes to defeat his opponent. When he asks why she's being so vocal, she explains that he could have used fewer moves to win. After impressing Pentecost, Raleigh spars with Mako and is astonished by her skills. He suggests that she co-pilot Gypsy Danger with her, but Pentecost refuses. Another pilot is picked for Raleigh, but Mako is allowed to pilot Gypsy Danger in a last-minute decision. During a test run in the Shatterdome, Mako becomes trapped in a painful memory during the drift session, almost causing the Jaeger's plasma cannon to fire within the dome. After the incident, Raleigh gains a deeper understanding of Mako. Mako lost her family to a Kaiju attack in Tokyo when she was a child. Just as she was about to be killed by the creature, a Jaeger piloted by Pentecost saved her life. Despite Mako's lapse in the drift, Raleigh still desires her as his co-pilot but is once again rejected by Pentecost. In the meantime, Dr. Jaisler has constructed a basic connection machine and links it to the Kaiju brain in his lab. However, However, the strain of the drift proves too much for Jaegers, and his colleague Godwin shuts down the experiment. Jaegers informs Pentecost and his team that the connection briefly allowed him to glimpse the other side of the portal. Based on Kaiju samples, Jaegers had theorized that the creatures they were fighting were cloned, and his drift vision supports this theory. Pentecost provides him with a small card and sends him to Hong Kong to locate a man named Hannibal Chow. Jaegers manages to track down Chow, who is actually an American operating under an alias. Jaegers is impressed with Chow's hidden room filled with live Kaiju specimens that could aid his research. Jaegers asks Chow for an intact brain, but Chow objects, citing the difficulty of obtaining a Kaiju brain due to the thickness of their skull bone. Jaegers suggests using a Kaiju's secondary brain instead. However, Chow raises concerns about Jaegers' connection to the other side, as he had also drifted with a Kaiju brain. A double event is occurring with Category 4 Kaijus codenamed Otachi and Leatherback. The Marshal tells Cherno Alpha and Crimson Typhoon to engage the monsters while Eureka Striker stays back to defend the harbor. He orders Raleigh and Mako to stay put for this mission. They head towards the ocean and the helicopters drop them in front of the coastline while Eureka's Striker follows closely behind. The Crimson Typhoon begins detecting movements around them, and the Kaiju Otachi jumps out, landing a direct hit using his tail and sending the Jaeger flying into the water. Typhoon recovers quickly and begins using their thundercloud formation. They manage to land multiple strikes on the creature, but their blades are stopped by Otachi. As it overpowers the Jaeger, Typhoon quickly jumps upwards and, using its amazing agility, flips the Kaiju in the air and throws it into the ocean. Alpha charges in and continues to pummel the monster by punching its head. Otachi sees an opening and knocks Cherno Alpha into the ocean. It then continues to attack Typhoon with the tail and eventually decapitates the Jaeger's head, killing the pilots inside. Seeing their teammates destroyed, the Russians begin charging at the monster, but Otachi spits out acid from its mouth, which paralyzes the robot. The Australian team rushes towards the battlefield and tries to save their teammates, but Leatherback jumps out from the ocean and begins attacking Cherno Alpha as well. Otachi goes to face the Australians but gets knocked down right away and continues to get pummeled by a barrage of punches followed by a devastating uppercut. Cherno Alpha gets pushed inside the ocean, and the Kaiju destroys its pilots by causing it to explode from inside. Eureka Striker grabs the monster and lifts it in the air. The robot throws the Kaiju in the water and prepares to finish it by launching its missiles. Leatherback senses the attack and releases a large pulse of EMP that disables the Jaeger and all electronics in the city. With no other choice, Stacker allows Raleigh and Mako on the battlefield as their Jaeger has a nuclear reactor and is not affected by the attack. At the same time, Newton runs away towards the closest shelter as Otachi comes looking for him after he drifted with their kind, destroying buildings and causing chaos in the city. Hansen decides to unhook himself from the machine but gets thrown to the walls when the Kaiju punches the Jaeger, damaging his arm in the process. He decides with his son to protect the city and buy the people some time by distracting the Kaiju with their flare guns, but only manages to annoy the monster, which turns to attack them. They're saved when Gypsy Danger appears from behind and catches the Kaiju's attention. Leatherback charges towards the Jaeger, but Gypsy manages to maneuver behind and destroy its weapons. This angers the monster, which prompts it to throw them onto shore. Gypsy manages to land without damage and charges towards Leatherback, hitting it with a devastating strike. They continue to punch the Kaiju and use their elbow rocket to send the creature stumbling backwards. The monster regains its balance and charges at the Jaeger, but Gypsy manages to hold it back. They prepare the plasma cannon and shoot at the Kaiju continuously until its arm falls off, and the monster becomes unconscious from the attack. Gypsy throws the body on the floor and begins heading towards the trail of destruction, hunting the other monster before Otachi can devour the doctor. It notices a presence approaching from behind and turns around, only to see Gypsy Danger walking towards it, dragging a cargo ship. Raleigh and Mako use the boat as a sword and begin striking the Kaiju with multiple attacks. The monster eventually fights back and throws away the boat. It then shoots acid at the Jaeger, but they manage to evade the attack. Just in time, Gypsy grabs the monster's tongue, trying to disable its weapons. Mako destroys the monster's tail by releasing coolants on it and breaking it into pieces. They then proceed to rip out the Kaiju's tongue with both hands. Surprisingly, the monster grabs onto the Jaeger and shows its wings. The creature then begins flying towards the sky as it strikes the robot into the buildings. Otachi continues to bring Gypsy out of the atmosphere as they begin to lose all functions. Mako takes their last weapon and proceeds to cut the creature in half with a sword. They begin falling heading towards the Earth and manage to slow down their descent by concentrating all their energy into a blast. They crash into the ground, causing a large shockwave but emerge unharmed. Raleigh and Mako come back to the headquarters, and everyone cheers for their victory. Meanwhile, Newton discovers that one of the dead kaiju was pregnant, and they can use the newborn creature's brain to enter the drift. They connect with the kaiju spring and discover the secrets to the breach by searching the memories. The two immediately realize that their plan won't work, and Russia still informed the Marshal. At the same time, Stacker has decided to replace Hansen due to his injuries and pilot the Jaeger personally. Chuck says goodbye to his father as he knows that this mission might be his last. The two remaining Jaegers drop into the ocean and begin heading towards the breach. They maneuver underwater and soon begin to realize that the visibility is extremely poor. As they reach closer to the portal, they begin seeing two kaijus, Scunner and Reiju, both Category 4s. However, they notice that oddly the kaijus are not trying to stop them from making the jump. The two doctors rush into the command room and tell them to stop immediately. They won't be able to go through the breach because it requires the kaiju's DNA for access. They have to trick the system by going into the portal with one of the monsters. Before the doctors can finish explaining, the radar picks up another signature coming out. This time, a Category 5 kaiju named Slattern appears. Raleigh and Mako try to help their teammate but get attacked by Scunner right away. They manage to throw the monster on the ground, but Reiju strikes from behind and takes out one of their arms. It turns around and charges at the main character, but instead of escaping, they point the sword at the monster and proceed to cut the kaiju in half using its own momentum. The Category 5 kaiju attacks Eureka and pushes it away from the breach. They manage to fight back and stab the monster with both of their swords, causing it to scream in agony. Slanted yells to his comrade for help, and the two monsters charge out the Jaeger with blinding speed. Realizing that there's no escape, the Marshal plans to use himself as a bomb to clear the way for Gypsy Danger so that they may use their nuclear reactor to close the breach. He detonates the bomb, which causes a huge explosion, sending the water away from underneath the ocean. Gypsy braces for the impact and begins walking towards the breach. Surprisingly, Slathering somehow survived the explosion and plans to prevent Gypsy from reaching the portal. They jump towards the monster and begin snapping it repeatedly. Raleigh turns on the central reactor and begins burning a hole through the kaiju, which ultimately kills it. They manage to make it through the bridge while carrying the monster's body. Mako slowly passes out from the lack of oxygen, but Raleigh puts her in the escape pod and fires it away from the aliens. He dislodges himself and continues towards the nuclear reactor, where he manually sets the explosion to occur in 60 seconds. Roddy then ejects himself in the escape pod as the Jaeger continues to fall into the kaiju's military base. The aliens look at the machine in confusion as the nuclear reactor approaches meltdown and explodes, destroying everything in the vicinity and closing the bridge at the same time. Both Mako and Raleigh survive the explosion, and the people are celebrating their victory. The two embrace each other as the military arrives to their rescue. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more interesting recaps.